Hello and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. Today my guest is Victoria Taylor, Head of Brand Marketing and Communications at R.M.Williams. Founded in 1932 and famous for its handcrafted leather boots, I don't know about you, but when I think of iconic Australian and Australian-owned brands, I think of R.M.Williams. Victoria is a fashion marketing queen with experience across brands like Hugo Boss, Tommy Hilfiger, Sea Folly, Sunny Life, and now over at R.M.Williams. In her recent roles as head of marketing, she's looked after digital, e-com, comms, and brand. And I'm really excited to unpack it all with you today and what you've learned. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here, Lindsay.
So you started off your career in fashion. Tell me a bit about what it is about fashion that continues to draw you in all these years later.
So professionally, I've been working in the fashion industry for around 15 years now. But I'd say my interest in fashion started much earlier than that. I studied fashion at marketing at university, knowing it was a really competitive industry to get into. I started picking up internships and doing lots of things on the side. And I really kind of got a taste for that high pressure and fast pace when I worked at US Vogue after studying in the US for a year. And that really set me on a path, opened up a lot of doors, and I was able to work for some global brands locally here in Australia, but also in the UK. I've landed my first gig in London as a fashion assistant, and I just remember getting that role and just thinking that I was set. I was like, I've achieved my dream role. And I remember working with my boss at the time, and she said to me, Victoria, I think you'd be great in PR. And I was young and impressionable, and I thought, yes, I'm going to work in PR. So that's when I really kind of started looking for different roles in PR, which really gave me that grounding for that storytelling piece and brand reputation. I then moved into these broader marketing roles. And at one point, I was able to head up the e-com side of the business, which really tightened up those commercial skills and that day-to-day trading, which I absolutely loved. And I think what drew me in from the beginning was just how powerful fashion can be. I really think it's not just about the clothes. It's, the ability to change how you feel. You can feel confident in things. We've all had those days where, you're not feeling so great and then you go shopping and you put something on and you feel amazing. And I've always been fascinated by what triggers people to buy things as well, and how those emotional connections can actually influence behavior. And I think as a marketer, it's really interesting to see how you can tap into that. And an example of that would be at Sea Folly, where we reframed the brand purpose at the time and centered it around making women feel confident at the beach. And having 2 children myself, I know how difficult it is to buy swimwear and go to the beach and you're practically wearing your underwear. So really my role was to really shape that messaging and tie it to fit, style, working with the right ambassadors so that women felt reassured that Sea Folly was the brand for them that will give them that confidence.
Amazing. So you've worked across some iconic brands, Hugo Boss, Tommy Hilfiger, Sea Folly. What do you think makes them iconic?
I think I would say it's translating that heritage into relevance, no matter what the audience is. From my early days at working with Hugo Boss, the heritage of the Boss brand was always around that German tailoring and sophistication. And to keep that relevant in this kind of more casual, modern world, one of the things that the marketing team and the comms team were really trying to tease out was that connection to the brand and to the culture, to create that cultural capital. So what we were doing at the time was just, and they still do a really good job of this today, is things like VIP clienteling. Over here in Australia, we were sponsors of the Formula One, and we would work with Lewis Hamilton, and we would invite our top customers to meet and greet with Lewis. And I just remember knowing our top 10 customers' names off by heart. I would take them out for dinner. We would take them to the NGV, which is the National Gallery of Victoria, and we would take them to exclusive experiences. And just being able to kind of connect with them in a way that makes the heritage of tailoring feel fresh and contemporary. And then at Tommy Hilfiger, Tommy was such a fun brand to work on. That was all about connecting with those younger audiences. And Tommy has this incredible heritage of being this American icon. It is really ingrained in that youth culture and music. And I guess the proposition or the challenge for us in Australia is how do we make that American proposition relevant in the Australian market? And really, it's about leaning into the brand's core pillars. And what was fantastic about working at Tommy is still at the helm. So when he established the brand from the outset, those sort of brand values still remain. And that's something so incredibly strong. We have some brand pillars, and it spells FAME, it's the acronym. So fashion, art, music, and entertainment. And being able to have that as your North Star and finding local equivalents in Australia was a really great way for us to be able to connect and take that DNA of the brand and actually let it play out through local voices and those platforms. And then at Sea Folly, it was all about tapping into that emotional connection with women to help them feel confident at the beach.
Incredible. I love the link between global and local. And I guess it takes a lot of trust, right? When you've got Tommy Hilfiger still in the hot seat, translating what is relevant and interesting about the brand to a local audience, that sort of localized perspective. Was that always a clear line of sight from global to you locally, or how did you go about making decisions around localizing the work here?
Yeah, great question. I think what was great about Tommy is the marketing budget was something that was so important that we would have to be spending. And it was always a percentage of sales. And every time we had a reforecast, sales were going up. So it was spend more, spend more, spend more, which was, actually quite challenging when you're scrambling at the end of the year
such a tough problem.
Trying to get media booked. But what was great about Tommy is that lots of international brands that are here in Australia, and it may have changed over the years, but there were lots of them would do like a bit of plug and play, and you would just get your assets and then you would just try and retrofit them for the territory here. But we had real creative license to do our own shoots, work with our own talent, and really make it resonate for Australia. I actually think it's a career highlight of mine when we actually brought Tommy Hilfiger himself to Australia. He would do this thing called Tommy Tour, and he would go around the world and go into market, and we would activate essentially. So I think we ended up doing about 12 different activations in 48 hours. Like the schedule was back to back. But from that really be able to catapult the brand in a long-term strategy way. So it wasn't just about the quick return. And that's what I really liked about working for Tommy is like they invested in brand so heavily. And I just remember people asking me when I was working at Tommy Hilfiger, I said, I'm bringing Tommy to Australia. And they're like, Tommy, oh, is that a person? People, they just see it as this big brand, but actually there is a face behind it. And he was instrumental of like being able to bring that electricity to the market. Something that Tommy Hilfiger does really well is he would work with talent that would be on the cusp of fame. So he would really kind of embed with these influencers or celebrities. And I remember being at New York Fashion Week, and this would have been about 2018, I think it was. And Zendaya was producing the fashion show. So he was doing a collaboration with Zendaya, and it was really just at that turning point. And now she's just this, incredible superstar. But I think that's one of the talents and the assets that Tommy really has, is being able to foresee these incredible budding stars and keep them in the black book of contacts or friends of the brand, essentially.
Yeah, incredible. How closely aligned do you think Tommy's own values were with the brand values? Was it sort of the brand was him and it was one and the same?
I think so, absolutely. I think his approach to his ways of working was embedded to who he was as a person, and being able to leverage his friends and his passions. So he's always been super connected in New York, the party scene, but also we talk about this fashion, art, music, entertainment. Like anything outside of that, it was a no. And I think that that's what makes things really clear, is being able to have this North Star that can guide not only what they're doing in Central in the US, but also the subsidiaries around the world of, okay, so if it doesn't align to these brand values, let's not do it because it's not the positioning that we want to be in. And I think lots of brands struggle with that because they don't have that North Star. So I feel really privileged to be able to work on a brand that has those guiding principles, and being able to kind of learn from that and be able to establish them in other brands.
I find it fascinating in the early days of a startup brand where the founder brand might be quite a pivotal and important part of getting the organization off the ground and brand building. And then I guess they gets to a point of scale and sort of needing to extrapolate, above and beyond a person into a standalone brand on its own two legs. How you translate a person's own values into the brand values. Often they're interrelated, but I guess almost like the adulting of a brand on its own two legs. And it sounds like with Tommy Hilfiger, he's hit that really nice balance between embodying him as a person and what, the success to date, with also something that resonates globally, and that the pillars are a way into culture in a contextual way. What would you say is your superpower when it comes to brand and comms?
I would say my superpower is collaboration at the heart. I think to be a good marketer, you absolutely need to have these personal skills and be able to rally people. Like, that's essentially my day-to-day, is bringing different channel leads together. Collaboration is really at the heart of everything I do. And being able to straddle between the comm side of things, the marketing, and the brand, it's really important that those three areas of the business actually work in harmony, because when they work together, that's really when you kind of get that magic happening. So just in terms of that collaboration piece, I think if you're selling a dream, you need to sell it internally before you take it to the external market. And without that internal collaboration, people on the outside will see when the magic's not happening on the inside. And I think that was really true when I stepped into Sea Folly. When I started at Sea Folly, I started in February, and I remember March, the brand went into administration. And I was thinking, oh gosh, but actually it was probably the most amazing thing that could have happened for the brand, because it really allowed us to reestablish what the brand stood for. At the time, you would go into store and then you would go on the Instagram and there would be a complete disconnect, and you would think this is not cohesive. So with that direction to, reevaluate what we stood for as a brand, redefine our brand pillars and our purpose, I was able to bring together the senior leaders in the business, whether that's from product through to merchandise, through to marketing, comms, and actually land on, okay, so we're for all women who want to feel confident at the beach. Because we had designers designing for 45 plus, and then marketing going for 18-year-olds. And there was a complete disconnect. And that's probably centered around what was the demise of when it went into VA. But being able to get the teams together, that's really when you can see the magic happening on the outside. So we established the brand values and redefined the brand purpose. We had a win-back campaign where we worked with Georgia Fowler, and she was really instrumental of getting us back on the map, because there was a time where Sea Folly lost its way a little bit, and the brand had sort of redirected to a young, maybe too young, and we'd lost that positioning of, who is our real audience, or who's the target market that we want to go after. And part of that repositioning work and that rebrand work was looking at that audience and that age group. And Sea Folly as a brand, if you've ever shopped there, it is very vast in terms of, you could be 18 and you could be 60, but that's not our bullseye target market. So we set a bullseye target market of, we're for all women who want to feel 29 years old.
Sign me up.
And I don't know about you, but I sometimes still feel that I'm 29 years old, even though I'm not. But I think it's that feeling, right? So we know that the Sea Folly girl is self-assured, she's confident, and she's got the world at her feet. And that's what a 29-year-old is feeling.
You've worked across Australia and the UK. What are some of the similarities and what are some of the differences as a marketer between the regions?
I think there are lots of similarities between Australia and the UK. The audiences there, they really value that authenticity and quality. And from my time at RM, I can understand that there's that deep appreciation for heritage and storytelling in brands. But what I do see is that it can play out quite differently in the different markets. And in Australia, RMs has become that, sort of uniform. And we really pride ourselves to the fact that we've been making our boots the same way since 1932. And that consistently resonates here. Whereas over in the UK, we actually joke about it quite a lot because we've been saying here, we've been making our boots since 1932. And you go over to the UK and they sort of look at you and laugh and say, well, we've been making boots since 1807 or whatever it is. And it's really quite funny. But what they don't have, which I think is a true testament to like an Australian brand, is that made of Australia. So we talk about our products being made in Australia, and that probably doesn't have quite the cut through over in the UK. But I feel like there's that appeal and interest in that made of. So that attitude that the Australian brands have, I think with RM, we've got a bit of swagger, we've got a bit of attitude, and we are that down-to-earth brand. And instead, what makes us relevant there is that the RMs feel really original and very distinctive. And that can be, quite compelling in, a very crowded heritage market.
When working with a heritage brand, how do you make decisions around what to keep that's always true and what to innovate in? Is that a bit of a gut feel, or how do you make those decisions?
I think that there's always a bit of friction between making the brand relevant for what it is today versus trying to ring fence that legacy of the brand. And I think that's really healthy. And, I think it's really just part of working for a heritage brand. What's really interesting is internally, we talk about working for RM as being brand custodians rather than just simply working for the brand. And there are times when it is a mix of both. And I think being a marketer where you are bilingual in that commercial side of things, but also you've got that storytelling and you understand, what resonates with your audience is really important. I think as well with our audience at RM is that our customers are very quick to tell us if we get things wrong or when they don't like things. And, I think it's important for us to have that playback with our customers.
Absolutely. And it shows that, it's a two-way feedback loop, that it's not just talking at, but in conversation with customers and feedback. Awesome. Okay, so you're now over at R.M.Williams as head of brand marketing and comms. Some people would disagree that comms should sit with marketing, and instead comms is whole of organisational kind of storytelling and marketing is, largely external sort of customer work. What's your view on that?
So I think it really depends on the business that you're working in and what that team structure looks like. I think for me, when I started out in my career working in comms and PR, I've always worked as an extension of the marketing team. And I think what is really great is when those two pieces become a partnership and you can work together. When dealing with comms and the marketing side here at RM, we work very closely with the team to ensure that there's that consistent message to the customer. One of the things that we've got coming down the line is we are going to be taking media to our workshop in Adelaide. And part of that storytelling, we've kind of been thinking about this for a long time in terms of that comms piece, being able to, talk about what we're doing behind the scenes, but that also leans really nicely into that marketing play. And we will be expanding that into our marketing channels and being able to have visibility over both comms and marketing is really exciting. And I think you are able to get the best out of the brand and those stories by seamlessly working with them together in harmony.
You've been in the role now about 6 months or so, I believe. Is there anything that surprised you about the RM brand from before you joined to what you know now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what surprises me most about working at RM's is just how much goes into making the pair of boots in Adelaide. Part of our onboarding, actually, when I started in Sydney, in the Sydney office, part of the onboarding is to fly down to Adelaide to really immerse yourself in the workshop. And by workshop, I mean this is where all the boots are made here in Australia. And I think people on the outside actually underestimate that everything is made here. They pass through 80 pairs of hands. And I remember standing in the waiting room, waiting for my tour guide to come and pick me up. And what was really heartwarming was there was a long lineup of plaques on the wall, and they had it was 25 years plus service, and there must have been about 10 of these, and it would have their names against it and how many years service. So it was all of them were 25 years plus. But then I would look a little bit closer, and there were some plaques there or names that said 60 years, 45 years. And that was just incredible because they just have this sense of camaraderie there at the workshop. But also, we actually have 4 generations of a family in the workshop. So I think that's really surprising as well. Like, people underestimate just how much heart goes into these boots and that they are made in Australia.
Yeah, incredible. You're now a brand steward of such an iconic Australian brand. Which part of the brand's evolution, whether it's the past, current state, or future, feels most exciting to you?
So we have these brand pillars, and we talk about connection to land and people. And it's all about talking to where we came from. And where we came from was the heartland, which is our rural Australia, regional Australia. And one of the projects that I've recently worked on, which I think is a really great example of how we're sort of looking back at where we came from, but bringing it into the now, is the Project Drover, which is essentially a custom-built trailer that brings to life the workshop in Adelaide through boot polishing, leather debossing, hat steaming, all of those kind of crafts pieces and the soul of the brand. But what we do is we put it on the road and we take it out to the most remote parts of the country. So a few weeks ago, I was over in WA and connecting with the people of the land there. And that's really something that RM established when he started the brand so many years ago. He was all about having a yarn, being authentic, and sharing those stories. What is really unique about the Drover experience is people in the land, they want to see that the brand is connecting with them, but also in a way that feels approachable, relaxed, and culturally attuned. Because if you imagine going into our flagship store, they can actually feel quite intimidating and, very much for the urban dweller, where the people on the land may not necessarily resonate to that. So it's been a really amazing way for us to be able to connect to the next generation. And in particular, these younger professional land workers, because we've got that, we can tell from our data that we have this salience with that older generation. But the real opportunity is going back out to these areas and talking to the land workers who are shaping that future of the rural Australia. And I think, that blend of heritage and innovation is really what makes the brand's future so exciting.
You're obviously a metro living marketer. How do you get out of your own head and own environment, to put yourself, no pun intended, but in the shoes of these new up and coming land working professions? How do you get out of your own situational environment?
It's a really good question. I often laugh because I'm such a city mouse, but I think the best way to navigate that is to actually go to these events and really understand what they're about. That's why I was over in WA a few weeks ago, and I'll be continually going to these shows. I think spending time with our brand ambassador here, he has worked for the brand for 35 years, and he knows the people of the land by name. But just having that respect to go out to them, show that you're up for a yarn, you're showing up within their community. One of the things that we have established as part of the Drover is working with a new ambassador over in WA. And not only just establishing that ambassador, but tapping into her resources and her community to be able to bring those stories to life authentically. One of the things that we recently did with her is her husband is this incredible mural artist. And he goes around these different communities and he paints these beautiful murals. And we worked with him and we documented some of the work that he's been doing and we put that up on our socials. And it didn't get the biggest engagement of a campaign, say, but what was really nice to see was all of the people that were commenting were followers of his tribe, of his community. So being able to just tease out the right stories with the right people and within the right communities is how I really try and connect with that side of the business.
How does the brand itself interrelate with First Nations peoples? I know back in your sort of early brand days, back in the sort of early 1930s, I think there was a link between RM himself and input from local First Nations people. How's that translated to modern day?
So one of the things that we do as an ongoing part of connecting with our land and people, aside from the Drover project, we have a program called Artist in Residence, and we work with artists from all over the country, being able to basically showcase their work within our flagship stores and actually sell some of their work. We actually have an Indigenous artist be part of that program, and it's something that we're really proud of. As part of the program, they would take a pair of boots and then they would turn the pair into a piece of art. And I think, it's really important to be able to be telling these stories.
So R.M.Williams used to be part of LVMH, then was acquired before your time in 2020 by Twiggy's investment company Tattarang. Day to day, how or does this ownership affect the brand?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to just cast our mind back to the Vuitton era and how I think that urban and international consumers saw a real strategic shift. LVMH invested heavily into Australia. They added another boot line in Adelaide, for example, to support the local production. And I think it's important to understand that it wasn't a strip and flip, which I think lots of people might think. During the COVID times, the leadership team took a pay cut to protect jobs. No one was let go. And there was a real commitment to people and that transparency. And now in the Tattarang era, there's an increased focus on these cultural values. And at the core of that, and something that Tattarang are really passionate about, is Australian manufacturing. So the investment decisions that we're doing day to day are really long term. They're not the quick wins. And that's really refreshing. And I think, obviously everything still needs to be justified in terms of brand salience, cultural relevance, and ROI. But Tattarang's commitment just extends beyond the bottom line. They're really passionate about made in Australia, preserving those jobs here in Australia and Adelaide. And they really have that sense of purpose that the brand really hasn't experienced before. The investments that are underway, we've got doubling the Adelaide factory space. So that's a huge initiative that the whole business is rallying around. We've got new store fit outs. We're expanding over in the UK. We've got the Drover project. And I think all these are designed for this long-term brand building and not necessarily that short-term profit. This October actually marks our 5 years with Tattarang. And I think it's a really great opportunity for us to be celebrating that pride and passion of being Australian owned.
Mm. Tattarang also owns a Kubra, which I didn't realise until recently. Do you ever overlap with other group brands, or do you sort of, deliberately have quite separate strategies?
So with Kubra, they're obviously our sister brand. We play in the same space. So the overlaps there will come from having the Kubras in our stores. There is a deep history between RM and Kubra that stems way back from when we first were founded, and they will continue to have those ties. Where we do come together is in the heartland, because there are so many opportunities for us to bring to life a Kubra at these heartland shows. Essentially, at the Drover we stock Kubras, but we're just starting to look long term of how we can leverage amplifying the Kubra brand at these spaces.
Yeah, definitely feels from a consumer perspective anyway, there's so much overlap in terms of brand DNA, core audience, even product styles. Is there any part of the R.M.Williams story that 6 months in now you wish more people understood or appreciated?
So I wish more people could understand just how much R.M.Williams is rooted in this function and necessity. So when RM actually developed these boots, it was during the Great Depression, and that's when RM moved to the Flinders range. And these boots, they were born out of hardship and practicality. And I think, lots of people see these boots as like these beautiful boots, which is obviously they are. But what's great about them is that they're essential to endure these really tough conditions. And, being in the Flinders Ranges, that was part of what he was establishing. They can't just be pretty. They have to have a real substance. And that's really ingrained in our legacy and our entrepreneurial spirit. As I mentioned before, these boots, they go through 80 pairs of hands in the Adelaide workshop. And then the finished product looks so simple, but the process behind that is filled with this human skill. We've got 400 artisans in the workshop in Adelaide, and our boots are designed to be remade. We actually resole up to 30,000 pairs a year. So that's also kind of tied into our DNA, I suppose, and our sustainability pillar, because what's so great about this, and this is a really nice brand proposition, is that they are designed to be remade and passed down. And I think one of the really nice things is when we talk about our brand purpose, our brand purpose at RM is we believe when things made well, they enrich life's journey. And what's really interesting in that brand purpose is the comma. And I see that as almost like a virtual handover. So behind the scenes, we believe when things are made well, we're designing and making sure that we're making these incredible boots. And then we have the handover. And then that's when the storytelling gets teased out with this, enriching life's journey. So being able to develop a pair of boots that can last 10, 20, 30 years is a really nice storytelling piece. We recently launched our brand campaign with Brian Brown for our Father's Day. And the campaign was centered around the role of a lifetime. And it's one that I'm incredibly proud of the team for putting it together. But in the video, he actually pulls out a pair of boots that are over 35 years old. And he's going to be passing those down to his grandchildren. And that piece of work was a real tearjerker. And he, in the piece, he actually speaks about not having a dad, but finding that father figure in his mum. And what was really nice about that was the message just kind of resonated with women as well as men. And it had that deep emotional depth. And actually, we've been calling it the Brian Brown effect, because since then we've had our best sales on record in terms of e-com, but also our fourth best week in retail ever on record. And that's outside of, Christmas period and things like that. So I think being able to tie back enriching life's journey into our campaigns is where the value is and where we can move the dial with the brand.
Incredible, and well done to you and the team. One thing I'm fascinated by is in this sort of modern world of fast fashion and the rise of Shein and Zara and quick fast fashion, R.M.Williams is sort of the antithesis. It's slow, it's 80 pairs of hands, it's quality, it's a pair of boots that you pass down through generations. From everything I've read, the RM brand, or the business, has doubled its revenue from the LVMH days now into Tattarang. What do you think has driven the sort of commercial success when everything about the data would be telling us that things are heading towards fast fashion?
I think it's because our boots are an investment and people want to be able to invest in something that they are going to have for life. I think one of the things that we're finding really challenging in this kind of tension between preserving legacy, but also, staying culturally relevant, is that tension between how media is consumed. And, we are moving at this lightning speed. We want short, snappy reels and things like that. And as you said, our boots are made slowly, with patience and with craft. And I think being able to tell that story in a way, in a medium that is super fast, can be really challenging. But I think what we're able to do is slow some of that down and actually tease out some of that storytelling in a way that does set ourselves outside of what everyone else is doing. And I think there's a real appreciation for that artisan piece, working with the brand coming from, Sea Folly, which it typically is fast fashion, but they do have that quality piece. We know that people want to invest in that quality and see that they can pass it down to their friends, to their generations. The other nice piece about RM is we have this ceremonial moment for the brand. So lots of people invest in RMs for maybe it's a graduation or a wedding or their first job. And that's something that the likes of Shein or, some of those other fast fashion brands, they just don't have that emotional tie to a product. And we see our product as more than just a commodity. It's entrenched in storytelling. And some of the boots that we have in our lineup, there's a signature by the worker in the workshop. And there's that human element that you just don't get with these fast fashion brands, which I think is what people are craving in this world of fads and fast fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. R.M.Williams is a proud Wallabies sponsor, and I know that you've got a partnership with Rugby Australia, and I'm assuming you've got a lot of other sort of partnerships and routes into different audiences. How do you make those decisions for the brand? Is it a gut feel because you sort of understand and there's so much heritage and legacy that you know where you play? Or are you looking at data sets and the sort of science of marketing?
I think it's a mix of both. I think going back to my earlier point around how Tommy, it was really great to work for a brand where Tommy had a North Star. They knew exactly what they wanted. I think what's really important for any marketing team is to have a set of goals that they want to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years. And it's a really powerful way of being able to say no to things. And with Rugby Australia, that's sort of been in the business before my time. And we're actually looking at what the future of Rugby Australia looks like at the moment. And broader still, what are the other partnerships that we want to play into? And I think what's really important is, yes, looking at the data. We know that we want to unlock certain audiences. I think it's also a little bit of a hunch when you know that the other day Paddington was heaving with rugby goers to go to the game. And, I saw hundreds of pairs of RMs. So, there is a bit of balance there, but it has to be right in terms of that science piece, So, yes, we marry up the data, but it's also a bit of common sense in the sense of, yes, this is where our audience is. And one of the things that we're doing in our media space at the moment is the target audience that we're kind of going after is really hard to get into their headspace because we're going for that 35 to 44 male kind of cohort. And a lot of them probably have young families and they're working. And there's only a certain amount of media you can actually tap into to get them. And one of the best ways in which we're trying to reach them, and I think that's been the success of the Wallabies collection, which is flew out the door, and also the success of the Brian Brown Father's Day video, is using KO and things like that, where our male audience is actually consuming media. So we can see from the data that, yes, absolutely, it's the right place to be playing in. But I think it was the brand hunch that took us there initially, and then the data kind of followed, and the results have followed since then too.
Great response. Thanks for the plug. What are your plans with the brand? What are the opportunities you see in the near or midterm?
So in the midterm at the moment, I mean, it's incredibly busy in Australia, but we're just as hectic over in new markets. So one of the challenges with our product, I mean, we're very well known and loved in Australia, and the challenge that we have is testament to our quality. Our boots, they're made incredibly well, and once you own a couple of pairs, some people are kind of set and, they're set for the next 30 years. So the biggest opportunity for the brand at the moment is that expansion over into the other markets. And the focus for us is over in the UK. And we have 4 stores over there, and we're planning to open 3 to 4 in the next 6 months. So doubling our retail footprint and being able to establish ourselves in London, but also these kind of market towns outside of that. So Cambridge, Marlow. And the reason for that is the audience there. There's almost like these fringe communities that know about our brand in the UK, which is really cool. I think what's really nice about being able to work for a brand where people actually value the craft, it's pretty obvious we have a subset of audiences that can stem from executives in the boardroom, and we've got a lot of creatives in London. But what's really exciting is the ones that have that appreciation for function. So when we go over to the UK, there's like this whole cohort of consumers and of the brand that live in these rural, or not rural because it's countryside, it's definitely not like Australia, but they know about our brand. And I think it's through that appreciation for the function and the form and the beauty. And I think what else is really cool about the audience over there is that they are a bit of a subculture on the other side of the world that have adopted our boots as part of their identity. And it's a way to see that the brand has moved just beyond boots and it's become more of a cultural symbol.
It's a great sort of case study or story in terms of how brand resonance has scaled globally. I guess you've got people with similar psychographic traits, or they value the same things: well-made, great products, the heritage, the story, even the land and the people component, and sort of shared philosophy, but in a totally different market.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see the success of all your stores in the UK.
We're really never surprised by seeing RMs on people's feet. They show up all over the world, from the back streets of Berlin to, we actually have a really interesting fan base amongst the traveling community in Ireland and the UK. They just absolutely love our boots. So, that's really fun and interesting, because what we see in Australia is very different to what we see in the UK. Over here, I think it's become quite, it's part of our culture. It's very mainstream. But over in the UK, it does have that nuance, and it does have that intrigue, I suppose, because people might not know the brand and they see someone wearing them and they're like, oh, they're cool. Like, where did you get them from? And then that's where, you get these kind of grassroots kind of expansion, I suppose. And that's kind of one of the things that we're working on over in the UK. I'm just standing up some new partners over there in terms of PR. But what we want to be doing is working with those people of influence over there that will talk to their friends. Like, they don't necessarily need to be superstar influencers, but I think, that word of mouth, community driven, even, working with those fringe communities. Like, we've got a really great campaign coming out in the UK in the next few weeks where we've worked with different artisans. And when I talk about artisans over there, it's, barbers and chefs and different sort of remit of how people wearing our boots, but wearing them to work, or they might even be musicians or artists, and they have their own kind of small following, but then that kind of grows into a bigger community subculture.
Incredible. I can't wait to see the new campaign. Last question from me. Personally, who do you think does brand marketing really well? Who do you admire as a brand?
Oh, there's a couple that I've been watching for a long time. I think Burberry recently have done a really great job of turning things around. They did have a moment there where, they were probably at the risk of becoming irrelevant. And over the last, 18 months, I think, they've got this fashion forward turnaround plan where they've just been really leaning into their core brand DNA. And that's something that I look at, and, I can see the opportunity for the likes of RM and other heritage brands where they're leaning into their core product offering. They had that content series where they talk about the Burberry weather in London, and that kind of emotional side of things, getting real and authentic. And their positioning has been really fun. They've been working with Glastonbury, for example. I think there's some really nice synergies there. And another one that just popped up on my feed that I've been admiring for a long time is Barber. I'm actually just talking about British brands, but I think there's a lot to learn from those heritage brands over in the UK and how they remain relevant over here, because Barber, for example, they've been around for a long time, and like, how do they remain relevant? Well, they've literally just launched a campaign or a collab with Farm Rio. And, that in itself is an interesting spin on what's traditionally a very sort of, country product, but then turning it through a fashion lens, keeping people, interested, but also unlocking a new audience that Farm Rio have really got a hold on, and being able to introduce that into the Barber brand.
Absolutely, especially when there's such a price premium. It's an astonishingly expensive brand, making it relevant to today. And I guess the storytelling that sits around it as to you buy once and you pass it down generationally, and what it means to embody the status of a brand, the brand lifestyle is fascinating at that sort of luxury end. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Cannot wait to see the new brand campaign in the UK next year. And looking forward to following all of your success.
Thanks so much for having me.
My key takeaway from chatting with Victoria is this idea of being a brand custodian, and instead of working for the brand, it's almost a purpose and a privilege to come into the marketing team and get to take the baton from someone that's gone before and to pass it on to someone who'll come after. I just love that idea of the richness and the slowness of investing in brand over time, and it really comes through the RM brand story.